Hi, everyone. It was kind of abrupt for me. Let me see. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Our guest speaker hasn't yet arrived, but I'm sure she will by the time we get through our introductions and that sort of thing. So I want to start by telling you that our president of Women High Tech, Rebecca Borman, also couldn't be with us today, but she asked that I step in and welcome all of you here. I'm Tiffany White, board member emeritus for Women in High Tech, and I'm also proud to work for Rolls-Royce. We've been supporters of Women in High Tech for over 10 years now. This will be our third annual OperationALL event and our first ever virtual OperationALL event, and we're calling it Advocates for Gender Equality. Okay, so many of you are new to the organization. We went out and invited you very specifically as leaders in your organization. But let me give you a little bit of information about Women in High Tech. We exist to change the landscape of women represented in STEM to be equally inclusive in all. The idea began in 1999 when an Eli Lilly scientist, Joyce Gustafson, and an Indiana University academic, Georgia Miller, discovered very few women working in high-tech jobs in Indianapolis. So these women decided to change that paradigm and found Women in High Tech and founded Women in High Tech as a nonprofit organization in Indianapolis. Over the past 2 decades, Women in High Tech has blazed a trail for supporting, recognizing, advancing, and helping women and girls in the STEM field in Indiana. In that time, Women in High Tech has become a pillar of the local STEM community through its educational, professional development, recognition, mentoring, and networking programs. We provide valuable resources to champion collegiate and career women, along with STEM exposure opportunities for girls K through 12. Like everyone else on this call, 2020 has been a really unprecedented year for us, but we're excited to share that despite our challenges, we've been very busy and done quite a bit, even though we've had to do it from home a lot of the times. To support our members, sponsors, partners, and friends, we quickly added an additional virtual program in this year, including a series of 8 virtual events titled Clickside Chats. We have also introduced our virtual book club that meets once a quarter. Our final book club for 2020 meets on December 10th, if you'd like to join us. We were also thrilled to host our first ever virtual Leading Light Awards and Scholarship Gala this past October 1st. We were honored alongside almost 400 virtual guests to celebrate and recognize 13 outstanding STEM professionals. We were also beyond delighted to award over $55,000, more than we ever have in the past, in scholarships and grants to 17 young ladies and women pursuing STEM degrees or certificates. We closed out this October with our final Executive Women's Forum. It was called Flipping the Switch on Racism and Women in STEM, The Journey to Equity. In case you missed the LLA, have missed any of our EWFs, you can watch them on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look for Women and High, H-I-T-E-C-H, and you can watch some of those wonderful programming. Today, Women in High Tech has over 50 corporate and collegiate sponsors. You saw most of them rolling by on the video just a few moments ago, and we have almost 2,000 members. We want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors for your continued support and engagement. We really appreciate your generosity in helping us to continue to advance our mission. I would also like to thank Women in High Tech's all of their volunteer board of directors and emeritus members. If you're on video board, give a little wave in case folks can see you. We really would like to thank all your hard work that you've put in over the years for Women in High Tech. We thank you ladies and gentlemen for sharing your time, talent, and treasures with us in this endeavor. I also want to give a big thank you out to our OperationALL committee. We were comprised of board and emeritus members and some member volunteers that helped put this event together for you today. I want to give a special thank you to Allison Lips, our Director of Community Outreach. She managed all your registrations and questions, and so she's done a fantastic job. Hi, Allison. Thanks, Allison. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to more of our committee members and let them talk about why they support women in high tech and why they're male allies. So first up is Ben Phillips, our treasurer.
That was quick, came quickly. I knew I had to speak. Hey everyone, I'm really happy to be here. My name is Ben Phillips. I'm a director at Katz Sappert Miller in the IT audit, security, financial audit practice. Live in Indianapolis, live in Westfield, work in Indianapolis. As Tiffany said, treasurer of Women in High Tech. I guess the answer I'm going to answer for you all, or just kind of give some light on, why was I passionate enough to join the board of Women in High Tech, and also just be a part of this movement and this realization of, a current inequality that is kind of, in my mind, a result of society that we just need to give opportunity for. So, I was raised very fortunate in my family. Both my parents were professors at Purdue University, both recently retired, but just living in that, growing up, seeing what could be and what worked well was something I probably took for granted when I was, growing up. And then as I matured, right, go to college, went to Purdue, went out into the workplace. Not to say that I serve a lot of clients and I've been around in public accounting for 11 years, but I've seen a lot of companies. And I like to think that all my clients are, like-minded, positive individuals running great companies. I am aware that, just the McKinsey report that was a piece of pre-reading. I'm not going to ramble off any statistics right now, but if you read that, I think it very well articulates why we're doing what we're doing. Specifically for me, I think, you can walk the walk, you can talk the talk, or you can walk the walk, right? At work, when I go to recruiting or anything like that, I like to walk the walk. I'm always showing up. I was at, in recruiting, I guess, your workforce is a byproduct of who you recruit and how you recruit. So I like to recruit tactically and ensure that, we start that pipe with a well-rounded group of diverse individuals, right? Allowing them all to have the opportunity to dance at the party when they get there. So that's I think 2.5 minutes, probably shorter than the 5. But I really appreciate the, working with the board, being a part of the board, ironically to me, bringing diversity to our board, which before me was, all women. And now you have, in my mind, a male ally at our board level, to where as we're working with our sponsors and as we're working with, other individuals, it's just a unique, you got to approach the market with diversity to be diverse. And I appreciate that, which is now I really like to pass it on to a friend and someone else, a member, to provide their feedback on why they are associated with Women in High Tech. And for this unique person is Cody Rivers, and Cody works at AIS, which is a local Indianapolis-based, security strategy managed services company. Here in Indianapolis, I think founded in maybe, 2012. The unique and special thing about AIS is they've been a long-term star sponsor of Women in High Tech. And the first OperationALL Male Allies Award winner that I had the fortunate opportunity to present is their CEO, Lamont Hatcher. So this is great because Cody's the CTO of that organization. I've known him for a very long time, very level-headed, and definitely, preaches what we're all speaking. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Cody Rivers.
All right, thanks, Ben. Everybody, thank you for joining today. I mean, first of all, I think the participation just shows kind of, everyone here's belief, and Lord knows right now on Thursday at 2 p.m. there's a lot we could all be doing, but the people here show that this is a worthwhile cause, and we all believe in it. As he said, I'm Chief Technology Officer for AIS, and we've been a proud sponsor of Women in High Tech for about 3 years now. We were fortunate to meet with Rebecca Borman, and she kind of brought us on as a sponsor, and that was kind of my first vision, or view into the organization. But it didn't stop there. A lot from my thing is, what else could I be doing? And so I kind of took it upon a personal responsibility to get more engaged, to ask more questions. Furthermore, I've been blessed to work with Darcy Lee for a little over a year now, and it's been phenomenal for our relationship, you know, through the business and friendship. But beyond that, as far as opening my eyes to things I should be reading, things to be listening to, how do I educate myself? And I'm sure, you know, I'm not alone here with, you know, other men on the call, but, you know, you see so much and there's so much to do, and time is limited. So it's, how do I get the best kind of bang for my time? To learn and to make an impact, you know, and what can I do beyond just education is, you know, as I've learned, you know, with my circle, and Ben I've known for a long time, but, you know, extending extending other male allies, and bringing more people to the party, to help share this message, to help grow this organization. And I've learned quite a few things, you know, in my brief time with here. But, you know, I'll share a funny story that I kind of, you know, learned here recently, and you know, again, I can thank Darcy has been, I'd say she's a huge mentor of mine when it comes to this here. She's super laid back and has got me involved in so many things. And I continue to be blessed with access and knowledge and these kind of events. But one thing I learned as a male was kind of things that you wouldn't think, you know, that are perception, right? So. When it comes to, you know, having women in the workplace, and an example that I learned with Darcy recently was when we have, you know, a woman who is recently had a child, and so we're looking at divvying up time in the workplace or for a certain project, and we're thinking, well, she's had a child, we're not going to send her out, or we're going to keep her at home, or close by home. That in turn is the wrong kind of message, because we're making that decision for her and not allowing her to make that decision. So from my eyes, going backwards, I'm thinking I'm doing a great job and have no clue. So it's things like that you learn that are beyond the surface of, you know, be respectful, you know, beyond just kind of this male dominated area, you know, of opening up and listening to conversations. There's much more beyond that. And it is a continual process of learning and asking questions, bringing friends. And then, you know, I mentioned like male allies. And so friends of mine who I can identify and say, hey, you know what, come check this out. You know, we've got a webinar, we've got different events that go on. This is a once in a year event. So it's not something you do every week. The practice is daily, it's weekly. You got to make it personal, and you got to believe in it. But again, I feel like I've gotten tenfold out of it what I've put into it. So I encourage people here to listen, ask questions. This is a great environment. You know, that no question's a dumb question. You know, that's what I've learned. And so again, I found that you don't learn unless you kind of you know, dive in head first. That's, again, it's kind of long-winded, but you know, the thing I like to just kind of focus on is how I found it. My first initial involvement, which was scratching the surface, you know, kind of my second dive into it, getting involved and joining this committee. And then again, I look forward to what is my next step. You know, it is a continual journey, but I've been blessed with access and got a great team around me, and great mentors. And then again, great friend and Ben I've known since college, and got plenty of funny stories on Ben for those interested at later times. But again, continually to reach out, recruit more people to the cause, ask questions, and you know, enjoy learning together, because I think it truly does takes both sides to really move the ball forward in the most efficient way possible. So thank you for that, and I will pass it back to Tiffany.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you giving us your insights, Cody, and you too, Ben. You're a wonderful male allies. I've really enjoyed working with you over the past 6 or so months, and look forward to spending even more time, especially when we can all get back together and have this event and other events with a beverage and some appetizer somewhere. All right. So what we're going to do next is we're going to do a little icebreaker. So I'd like everybody, if possible, if you're capable of it, go ahead and turn on your video. You can also unmute yourself in a moment. And one of our committee members back there working the IT for me, she's going to break us up into small groups. We're going to be pushed into these rooms, and then we'll have an opportunity to do this icebreaker. So this is on the second page of your worksheet if you happen to have printed it out or have it over here on your iPad somewhere. If not, no worries. We're going to ask 3 questions, and we're going to give you a little bit of time in your little small groups to talk through these questions. So the first one is just introduce yourself. What's your organization? What's your role? And then what behaviors would you like to see more or less of from your team? And then what would your team look like and feel like if it were even more inclusive? So we're going to give you 5 to 7 minutes on this. And when the time is up, you will be electronically pulled back into this main room, and we'll get started from there. All right.
Can you repeat the questions, Tiffany, one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to repeat them again. Just your name, your organization, and your role. What behaviors would you like to see more or less from your team? And what would you like your team to look and feel like if it were more diverse and inclusive? What would your team look like and feel like if it were more diverse and inclusive? All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Lori. Push us off into our rooms. Look who's joined us. Julie Kratz has joined us. I'm so excited that you're here, Julie.
I know. I'm excited. I'm here too.
Absolutely. So Julie is a coach, a TEDx speaker, and author of 2 fantastic books. All of you received this either electronically, but I encourage you to go on to Amazon and get one. That's also a really great book. You can see I've tabbed it all up. So yeah, go ahead. And they're really short, easy reads. So I really encourage you to do that. Okay, Julie, we've done our icebreaker. So you've joined right at the right time, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's good to be with everyone. I apologize for the miscommunication and my tardiness. I got to see one of the breakout rooms though and saw some really healthy conversation going. I know it was a little short. So what we promise is we're going to dig into breakout rooms throughout the course of our time together today. So you're going to have 3 more opportunities to dig in and have a good, robust conversation. So consider that the appetizer, if you will, for more engaging conversation and discussion to happen. So if you didn't have a chance to fully introduce yourself, you will in the next breakout room. So with all of that, I appreciate everyone's patience. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our agenda today. So the first thing we're going to cover is how to give good feedback. So the framework that we put together, and this was very, very deliberate and intentional with Women in High Tech, based on your feedback from last year, so we really wanted to be able to provide tangible tools and techniques for you to walk away with today's conversation to apply right away. So I said, it's great to be an ally. It's great to think about inclusive leadership and diversity, but what do I do is always the big question. So some of the key pillars that we carved out specifically based on your feedback was, how do I give candid feedback, especially to somebody that maybe isn't like me, right? So we have a tendency to kind of soft glove things with people that are different than us versus somebody that's like me. I feel like I can give them really candid feedback. So how do I structure that? So that's one key piece. Then we're going to talk about challenging with care, how to challenge people that you care about in a constructive, intentional, and consistent way. So again, what the data shows us with diversity and inclusion is that those that are different, right? Those that are underrepresented in organizations, women, people of color, those with disabilities, those that have perhaps are in the LGBTQ plus community, don't get as much candid feedback. They don't get as much of a challenge, whether that's stretch assignments or being challenged to do more than maybe they've done in the past. We tend to assess men based on potential and women based on performance. So we'll unpack that one. And then we're going to have some really hands-on exercise with coaching. So we talk about coaching skills. As somebody that has done some coaching certification and coaching over the years, a lot of people think it's about giving advice. And I'm always surprised to tell people, no, it's not about telling people what to do. It's a lot more about getting them to self-discover their path forward. So we're going to call that kind of facilitating somebody's own thinking rather than giving advice, because our tendency in tough situations, especially when we're working with somebody that's maybe, again, different than us, or somebody that we want to help because they're sharing something hard with us. It's just give them advice and want to make it be better, right? And that's oftentimes not what people want when they're sharing something hard with you, when they're experiencing something maybe as being part of a marginalized group that's tough. They don't want pity. They want empathy, right? And they want to come up with their own solutions to their own problems. And then we're going to wrap up with commitments. So at the top of our time together, we'll wrap up, and I'd love for everybody to have one tangible thing they can take with them back to the workplace, back to their community, personal, professional, you choose, but we will intentionally write down one thing we'll do as a result of what we learned together today. I know you've got a lot of Zoom meetings if you're like me, and your calendar's packed of these things. Choosing to be with us today is a big deal, and we want to make sure that your time is well invested and that you have something that you can do. So that's the plan for today. We've already done our icebreaker, so thank you for doing that. And now we're going to talk about candid feedback first. So I believe the workbook that goes along with today's discussion has been shared in the chat. So you can actually download that, follow along, take notes. There's some discussion activities that we'll use breakout rooms for again. So it's really helpful as I'm speaking with you, be thinking about what you can take away from the conversation. And I'll give you some time to think and kind of put pen to paper on your ideas, and then send you into some breakout rooms to discuss and unpack further. So I want to pause. Any questions on the plan? I saw the chat come up, but can't see it. So let me know, Tiffany, Lori, if I miss anything on the chat. It looks like it's not coming up live for me, but I'll pause and take any questions at multiple times throughout our discussion. So I promise not to talk at you if you promise to talk with me and be interactive in the conversation. So the first piece is candid feedback. How do we give constructive feedback to all genders equally? When I say all genders, y'all have probably heard a bit about gender non-binary, and that gender is a spectrum. I know we talked about this last year when we were live together, but the idea that it's not just exclusively male and female, right? There's more of a fluidity to gender and gender expression and gender identity. So gender identity is a good word to kind of use so that we're being holistic across that gender spectrum, from masculine to feminine to female to male. There is a blend in the middle. And if you identify as somebody that's cisgender, so that's the same gender of which you were assigned at birth, that's what that means. If you're non-binary, you don't exclusively identify with either gender. And then if you are transgender, it's when you identify with somebody of the opposite gender of which you were assigned at birth. So just kind of a gender lesson there. But when we talk about women and men today, if you identify as a woman, if you identify as male, that's what we're working with as far as the definition goes. So let me just explain why we picked this. So what we know to be true from a gender identity standpoint is that women are less likely to get feedback than their male counterparts. So the fear is often what men will share with me. What women will share with me is that it feels like I'm holding back because I'm afraid I'm going to upset her. I'm afraid that she's going to become emotional. Sometimes I've heard that. Or I'm afraid that she's going to take this really personally and it's going to disrupt our relationship. So you can see some of the fears over here. Sometimes we're afraid that especially if somebody's in a position of power, that there's a retaliation factor, that they could come back at us or use it against us later, or they're going to get really defensive and take it the wrong way, and our relationship is going to be terrible because we want to protect the relationship long term. Maybe I need that person to do things in the future, and I don't want to take the chance that they're going to be so mad at me that they're not going to want to help me in the future. And then I think it all has to do with the fear of the unknown. Telling somebody something hard, giving somebody constructive feedback. I don't know about you, but my blood pressure raises. Like, oh, I don't want to tell somebody something that they're not going to want to hear. So kind of thinking about your own fears. And for those of you, jump in the chat, who's afraid of giving somebody feedback? And regardless of gender, is it scary for you? Do you feel comfortable with it? Is it something that feels easy for you? Is it something, a lot of times people tell me, well, I just have to do it. As a leader, I just have to rip the Band-Aid and do it. So feel free to share kind of your relationship with feedback. And if any of these fears resonate with you, I know for me, I'm a very high, when I think about personality assessments, it's really helpful to have kind of self-awareness around this. On DISC, I'm a really high I, which means I like influence. So I don't want to disrupt the relationship. If I have to give someone hard feedback, I'm afraid that I'm going to ruin the relationship or sever the relationship somehow. So thinking about you, what you know about yourself, your fears, but the fear might be real in your head, but oftentimes it's really unreal in practice. So when I think about giving people candid feedback, you might be afraid of somebody retaliating. You might be afraid of someone disrupting the relationship and not being able to work with them in the future. But often that's not real. In practice, oftentimes when we give somebody feedback, we tell them something hard, especially if we frame it the way I'm going to teach you today, you build trust in the relationship. You often end up on the other side of the relationship like, wow, we could get through that. We can get through a lot of hard stuff. You think about all we're experiencing with COVID in the workplace this year. I don't know about you, but I have had stronger relationships with people that we've gone through this hard thing together, right? And so on the other the other side of this, we're usually stronger. So just kind of get a handle on your fear. Feel free to chat. If any of those resonate with you, again, workbook to kind of take note if any of that, or how comfortable do you feel? I want you to reflect on that. And then what fears might you have when having to give people feedback? Because again, we know when talking about women, they're less likely to get this constructive feedback. So how candid are you in general? So another kind of self-reflective piece. I want you to just think about some of these themes. And again, jot down some notes for your breakout room exercise. Think about how much do you hold back, right? Versus speak what I call your truth. So I had this feedback early on when I was a people leader in corporate America before starting my own business. People would say, Julie, I can see it all over your face that you're holding back. You're not telling us something, or you don't agree with the decisions that have been made at the corporate level, but you're trying to smile and make us think that you're okay with it when I know you're not. So don't even bother pretending. Body language can show our emotions much more than we're often aware of. So how much do you speak the truth? When people know you have something to say, does your body synchronize? So is your body mirroring how you feel? Are you able to say what you're feeling honestly? And even if it's hard. The next one is sometimes with candor, what can be really hard is avoiding consensus. So sometimes we want everyone to agree, right? Everyone on the team. And the bigger your team is, the harder it is. You can just look to politics of how hard it is for us to all agree on the same thing. But it's often results in no decision or a very delayed decision. This is really hard with diversity and inclusion because the more diversity we add to the mix, the more hard it is to get something like consensus because you have so many different perspectives. That's actually a good thing though, because you usually end up with a better idea, even if not everyone agrees with the idea, but they commit to the idea. So thinking about how much do you seek consensus versus avoiding it would be the more healthy, candid behavior. Wanting collaboration, of course, wanting commitment, of course, but not wanting everyone uniformly to agree, because usually our ideas get shallow.
Cautious.
And then how about owning the decision? So as a leader, this is something that's really important, that you own your decision. So rather than point the finger the other way, which we know how many fingers are pointing back at us when we do that, how much you take a stand, have a perspective, even when it's not perfect, even when it's messy, even when it's hard. Think about all the change we've encompassed this year. Thinking about putting a line in the sand, making a decision, even when you know it's not 100% perfect. It's 80% there. It's done, not perfect, I like to say. Respect others' perspectives. So again, take an inventory on these. Think about how much do you respect others' perspectives? And how much do you take on the perspectives of others rather than wanting to share our own perspectives? Usually when we go into a hard conversation or share something hard, we just want to tell the person what we think without opening the door to what they think. So how can we let others speak their truth? And this is about diversity, being seen, heard, and belong. You hear me say that a lot. People that are the other, that are underrepresented in organizations, women, people of color, again, those with disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community, just to name a few, tend to not feel as seen, tend to not feel as heard, tend to not have that deeper sense of belonging in the workplace because they don't see themselves reflected. Right? So how much are we respecting and welcoming those perspectives instead of shying away from them or being afraid that they might say something that's uncomfortable, but true? Even if we don't let it out, people are still thinking these things. I like to remind people, just because you're not hearing them doesn't mean people aren't thinking them. And then this commitment piece. So rather than consensus, what we want to do to be candid is really get people to commit even when they disagree. And this is something that we want to make sure that people's voices are heard and that disagreement, discontent is let out, but that we don't let that ruin making a decision, right? Yes, I heard you. Yes, we can take a piece of that. Yes, this is true, but we're not going to let that water down the whole decision or delay the decision. And of course, we want people to buy into that, right? We want everyone to kind of signal like, I'm on board with that. I used to use this example of commitment back in the old days when we used to fly in airplanes. Remember that? The exit row. What did they ask you when you said in the exit row? Right? Do you agree? Right? Do you agree to commit, rather not agree? Do you commit to helping others get off the airplane in an emergency? Right? And you have to say yes. You have to shake your head. You have to say something. That's on purpose. They're getting your commitment. Why don't we do that more with hard conversations in corporate America? I'm always surprised by how much we have this conversation and then we don't commit to action at the end. And then we wonder why it just continues to fester. And then the last thing about being candid with others is refraining from kicking the can. So as a leader, you sometimes got to make the call. You got to make the tough decisions. Don't wait for others to do it. You do something. Those baby steps really do matter. So even if you can't make a huge, big decision about, a new program, a new idea, a new product, service, whatever it is, maybe you can make an incremental decision that gets you further along the path. And by welcoming other perspectives, gaining commitment rather than the overall consensus, which is so hard to do, and speaking your truth and owning the decision, people respect you for it. They see you as inclusive. They see you as what we're calling an ally, that they see that you want them to be seen, heard, and belong. So all these behaviors, kind of think about this as a choose your own adventure approach. Think about all these 6, kind of take a tally of ones that you think you're good at and ones that you might have some opportunity on. So people tend to do well in like half of these, and then the other half, they're like, I could probably do better there. And we're going to use that to have some discussion around that. So we'll dig in more. Self-awareness is a gift. Self-awareness is often where these skills start. In candid feedback, when we give candid feedback, it really requires strong communication. So I mentioned body language before. This is the majority of how we communicate. About 2/3 of our communication comes across from our body, especially our hands, oftentimes signal trust, how our face looks, our posture. Even on a Zoom call, you're evaluating me on how much you believe what I'm saying based on the way my face looks. So I'm very well aware of that and self-conscious of that. And oftentimes with trust, especially, people look to someone's hands if they can trust them, if they're open, right? This is why it's so important that we keep our bodies open when we're communicating hard things. That includes our hands, our eyes, our arms. I have clients that'll tell me like, I'm cold, and this is why I sit like this. And I'll say, yeah, but you're going to get a different response from somebody with a closed off body position versus an open body position. Just try it out in a conversation. You'll see complete differences in how people respond because we mirror body language. So if you've been around somebody that does this, you probably start to do that too, right? If someone avoids eye contact, you probably start to avoid it with them too. We mirror each other, mirror neurons in our brains without even knowing it. And then if nothing else, as an ally today, it is a lot less about talking and a lot more about listening. The idea here, even when we're doing something like providing candid feedback, is to listen first to the other perspective. So walk you through a model here in a second. You still want to open and share, what the feedback is, but then you want to ask a question to really get that person engaged in the conversation so that it's a two-way dialogue versus a one-way. I call this the ping pong conversation. If you've been in one of those, like I just keep saying what I keep saying and this person keeps saying what they want to say and no one's really listening. Those are painful conversations. Open questions. So we're going to talk about open questions throughout the course of our conversation today. But for now, just think about how you can ask things like, help me understand. I used to have a boss that asked me this all the time. Julie, help me understand where you're coming from here. And I'm like, he does not understand anything. Well, he was coaching me. Within 6 months, I was able to really solve my own problems and grow so much as a leader because he didn't tell me what to do. He forced me to make decisions. And this is what inclusive leaders do really, really well without you even knowing that they're doing it. They're putting the decision back on you without trying to save the day for you. Another trick, So if you're struggling with your questions and you find that you ask a lot of close-ended questions, which by the way, we all do, those questions like, do you think this? Should we do this? Could we do this? Those are all closed. Just swap out the words. Just bring in a what or a how into those questions. Those glean much more information from the party you're talking to. So what do you think? How did you get there? Those are open questions. They're impossible to answer with one or two words. You have to expand the dialogue. And when you get somebody talking more, you're more likely to get information that you can then use to guide them further, right? You're getting their input, you're getting that commitment. And then last but not least, affirmations. This is anyone that's went through communication training, leadership training. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I think it bears some repeating, and people really want to be heard. So especially groups that are underrepresented in organizations. So they're less likely to be heard in meetings, to even be invited to meetings. They're more likely to be interrupted. They're less likely to get candid feedback like this. So it's really important that when someone does speak up, especially someone that might be nervous or may not get the opportunity to speak up quite a bit, or might be the only one that looks like them in a room, that we hear what they're saying. And so visibly hearing what they're saying, more importantly, playing back exactly what they said. I heard Sandra say A, B, and C, and use her exact words to show that you've listened. So it's very affirming, and it's more likely to engage that person in the dialogue. So last piece, and then I'm going to use some thought questions to think about in your workbook and send you on your way in another breakout room exercise. Feedback is a gift. So this is the last thought I'll share on feedback. I remember a manager telling me this once in my corporate days, and I was like, that didn't feel like a gift, right? But if you do feedback well, so if you are good at providing feedback and good at receiving feedback, it often is a gift. It helps you grow. It helps you get better. So as human beings, we don't know what we don't know, right? I can't see myself. I can't see how I'm coming across. I can't guess how you're perceiving me. I can guess, but I don't know for sure. So we need feedback to get better. Right? The only way to get better is to learn. And this is a really proven framework to help it land well. So has anyone seen this before? Jump in the chat. Sometimes it's shorthand called SBI, but essentially it stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact, thus SBI, an acronym. And I find this super helpful when I'm going into a conversation with a client or a team member and I'm not sure how to frame it and it's a difficult conversation. I just think about the S, the B, and the I. So ideally, I would start a conversation with somebody. If I need to share feedback with them, be candid with them, be honest with them about something that they're doing that's maybe just not helpful, right? Or not being perceived in the right way. I would want to start with the situation. So I'd want to share the who, what, where, when, why of the situation. So who was there? What were they doing? Where were we? When was it? Especially if it was a long time ago. Ideally, we want to give timely feedback. So as close to the actual event as possible. I used to have a team member that would ask for feedback right at the end of a meeting, every meeting. So you were on point to give feedback at the end. And the why of the situation. Just kind of cover the bases. Hey, we were in this meeting 2 weeks ago. You and I were here with this person, and this is what was said. Okay, that's it. 20 seconds. Then quickly get into the behaviors. And this is where feedback goes off the rails, is that we forget about behavior and we use personal labels instead. So these are the actions, the words that were actually said in the situation. I saw you do this. I heard you say this. Those types of things is what you would want to say when labeling behaviors. So perhaps you said you didn't know and I felt like you were holding back, right? That kind of thing. Or I heard you invite so-and-so to the meeting, but not them. The perception was that they were not included. These are the types of things we want to isolate behaviors. We don't want to give personal labels or attacks. We don't want to say something like you were being aggressive or you were being difficult. That's going to get somebody really defensive, and their only choice will be to defend why they weren't being aggressive or why they weren't being inclusive. And then the impact of that behavior. So people only change behavior when they know it's causing a negative impact, when they're not getting something that they want, or they're not getting the desired result. So oftentimes I'll frame it as the impact to the client, the impact to the team member, the impact to the business. So when you said this, the impact to the team was this, and create a linkage between the behavior and why the impact isn't so good, why it's unhelpful. And then we want to coach. So when we're going to talk about coaching skills here in a couple learning objectives, we'll get to the GROW model here, but ideally we want to get them involved in the conversation. So we want to make it a two-way conversation. So if I know I've had clients share with me before, I got feedback from my boss and it was like 45 long conversation. I didn't get a chance to talk at all. And I left not knowing at all what I'm supposed to do. That's not good. So we want to have maybe a 2-minute framing, situation, behavior, impact. Do your homework, jot down some notes in advance, and then say, what do you think, right? How do you take this? And then get the conversation two ways so that you can brainstorm how to be better next time. Some other tangible ways to start a feedback conversation. I share this with people all the time, especially if you tell them something hard, is I care about you and I want to share something that's difficult for me to share, because they can tell that it's hard for me to share based on my body language again. I want to hear your perspective on this, right? If somebody's holding back or maybe not contributing, what if nothing changes? That's one of my favorites. It's a really good coaching question. If you want to get somebody to change something about them that's going to be unhelpful, but maybe they're not super self-aware about it, or maybe they're not seeing it as causing the negative impact. Or I want your help with something. That's a really honest way to start a hard conversation. I want to talk to you about something that's hard. I mean, just label it, put it out there, be vulnerable. People will mirror that vulnerability. And I noticed when you say or do this, the perception is this, and that keyword perception. So much of the words we use really do matter. So labeling your inclusive words, getting comfortable with some of these conversation starters. So pick one or two from there that maybe work well for you, or one that you could try on. We're going to talk about kind of language, inclusive language to put in our back pocket today, whether these are the questions you ask, how you frame a feedback conversation. You'll have lots of choices, lots of things to try after this, but just write down the ones you like for now. So let's pause here. And this is the first activity that we have for you. So this is guided again in your workbook that was shared in the chat. There's 3 questions. So what I want you to do is just kind of put pen to paper on these, or if you're typing, however you like to take notes and reflect. But the best allies, the people that are inclusively leading, give candid feedback really, really well. So how do you want to bolster the skill? This is usually something that we can always get better at. So kind of think about, how would you assess your feedback skills? So remember when I shared all those candor behaviors, how much do you affirm people? How much do you, avoid consensus and kicking the can versus getting commitment and creating buy-in? How would you assess your feedback skills? Giving and receiving. So maybe give yourself a score on that. Like, I give feedback like 88 out of 10, like 80% of the time I'm doing it, but there's some situations still tough for me. And then receiving feedback, because if you're not good at receiving feedback, your ability to give feedback is probably not going to be as strong either, because people are going to see it as like, well, they just dish it and they don't take it, right? So you got to be able to have some reciprocal relationship with feedback. It's going to score yourself. How would you assess your feedback skills? Your ability to give feedback, your ability to receive feedback. If you just want to kind of put a 1 to 10 point score on that, 10 being the strongest, and why, and maybe some of the behaviors I explained. So that's the first question for you. The second question for you is, how could you use the situation behavior impact model? So remember I shared SBI. It's kind of a 2-minute prep. So before I go into a hard conversation, I just spend a couple minutes thinking about, okay, I need to tee up the situation so they know what I'm talking about. I got to mentally take them back to the time it happened. I got to focus on the behaviors, what they said, what they did, the impacts, right, to the team, the client, the organization. And then the last question is, what feedback conversation starters could you use? So again, this was the list here. Ones that you like, ones that you've used in the past, ones you'd add to this list. So just kind of pick 1 or 2 or add 1 or 2 of your own in your workbook. So I'm going to pause and be quiet because I just talked at you a bunch. Okay, you're going to talk with us, and we're going to send you to a breakout room in about a minute. So Laura, if you want to get those ready in just a minute, we'll send you to a breakout room. And just think about, pick one of these questions you want to share in the spirit of time. Just kind of pick one thing you'd want to share from this activity. So we're about the halfway mark. So good thing if you got some stretching out of the way and are ready to continue the conversation. As we talk about stretching talent equally, Feedback is important. So we know that people in minority groups, get women, people of color, kind of all these different groups that are not a part of the majority group that tends to be white male, leading most organizations in all industries, not just tech, that we also don't get challenged as much. So the way I'm talking about challenge is either getting opportunities to grow. So being, that stretch assignment, the high potential marking in the talent management process, however you think about that, or whatever that looks like in your organization, or for how you think about challenging those that you work with as a leader. So you can kind of define it how you want to, but essentially the way we're going to frame it today is giving opportunities to grow high potential talent equally across all genders, okay? What we know from the data is that women are far more likely to experience what we call microaggressions. So if you identify as a woman, you've probably experienced this. And go ahead and in the chat, if you've got some context to add or want to just say, yep, I've had this happen, you're not alone. Now, for men and men as allies, I think it's just important to say, yeah, these things might have happened to you as well. But what the data shows is that women are more likely to experience this. And some of the data I'm sharing with you, like 4 times more likely to get interrupted in a meeting. And this is a really big deal. Interruptions can take 23 minutes on average to recover from. So it's not just the one interruption. It's like, okay, our brain has been kind of hijacked to thinking like, oh, well, they didn't care about that idea. And then you kind of ruminate on it. And so you're not back to how previous state for 23 minutes. So it's costly, an interruption. It is a big deal. Also, what women will often share with me is bro-appropriations, also known as taking credit for an idea. So because ideas are more widely accepted when they come from the majority group, white men, those that are underrepresented, women, people of color, and other dimensions, will often say that they'll share an idea in a setting, and 5 minutes later, somebody in the majority group shares the same idea, and suddenly it has merit. And you're like, that didn't feel so good, right? And not only do you not get credit for the idea, but you feel like someone took your idea, which just doesn't feel fair or right. And then it can come off not so nice if you call attention to that fact. So this is a really good chance to be an ally for somebody to say, hey, Cheryl was still sharing that. Let's go back to her idea. Another thing you might experience are unfair assumptions. So we tend to unfairly judge others that are different. So if you've heard some of these before, this is code language, and I bet you've heard this happen at your organization or somewhere you've worked before. I don't know if they're a cultural fit here. What does that mean, right? Who is a fit and why? And do they look a certain way and behave a certain way or go to a certain college? Like, what's that all about? Qualifications. So some of my clients will tell me, we want diverse talent, but we can't lower the bar. What are we assuming about diverse talent somehow not meeting those qualifications? How do you know that's true? And have you even thought about if all the qualifications are really necessary to perform the job? A lot of times we set the bar very much higher. And we know that men will apply for jobs where they have 60% of the criteria met, where women will look for like 90+% being met to apply because they think they're actual qualifications for the job, like it says. Caregiving, we're seeing a crisis in caregiving right now with COVID and e-learning. Women are 70% of primary caregivers. That may not be the case in your household. It is not the case in mine. But what we know to be true is that women are exiting the workforce. 80% of those that left the workforce last month were women. And the biggest reason was feeling overwhelmed and not being able to do it all. So what are we doing, right, to signal to women that they can't do it all? And do we make assumptions about women being primary caregivers when maybe they are not? Abilities that we assume if somebody does have young children that they can't travel, they can't stay late, they don't want to be promoted. That's just not fair. That's not accurate most of the time. And we also may make assumptions about people's education levels. You know, sometimes people of color are discriminated against because they're assumed that they don't have as much education, or they have to have much, much more education to even be equally considered to their white colleagues. Last one, biased statements. So with little awareness yet positive intent, we label others that are different because of previous interactions with people like them. So a lot of times the way our brain works is that we're wired to make assumptions based on categories. So For the simplicity of today's conversation, you see somebody that's a woman, you've interacted with a woman like this before that had young children. She didn't want to pursue promotional opportunities at that point in her career. Your brain makes the assumption with another woman like this that maybe has young children that she doesn't want to be promoted at this point in her career, when you don't know that's true. It's our brains recognize categories, make assumptions, and if we're not careful, we can behave in ways that are aligned with that. And that's what we want to slow down. So just take an inventory of these, whether it's in your workbook or wherever you're taking notes today. Women, have you had these things happen to you? Men, these are chances to be allies. So for any microaggression you see, an unfair assumption, taking credit, interruptions, you can intervene. And you don't have to be mean about it, but you can just simply call attention to the fact of like, how do you know that's true? Why did you say that? Let's go back to who shared the idea before. These are little subtle acts that what women will tell me over time that make a huge, huge difference. So oftentimes the small acts of allyship along the way are really what are most meaningful. It's not the save the day sweeping, momentous occasion. Honestly, it's the everyday, consistent, intentional showing up. So chances to be allies for others. Also opportunity to kind of see how this has affected you. Carol shared interruptions are definitely a big one. So which ones have you experienced? Put your ally radar up. That's what I call it. And look for these things in the workplace. But I'm telling you, I can watch a meeting and tell how inclusive a team is very quickly by these things that happen and the things that don't happen too. And who has airtime and who doesn't. And if you thought it was bad before, Zoom data shows the virtual world that these are happening much more actually than you think. So there's a bias I mentioned before called potential versus performance gender bias. So again, gender is a continuum, it's a spectrum, but for the purposes of just talking about men and women today, the assumptions that we'll make about men, a lot of times unfairly, is he's done things like this before. Surely he can handle this challenging assignment. He's a natural, or he would be great at that role. Not that he's been great at that role before, but he certainly would be great because we've seen men like that achieve success in that role. So again, that's that bias. Women, on the other hand, a lot of times it looks like, I'm not sure if she would be interested in that role. She's never done that before. I'm not sure if she'll fit in here. I'm not sure how committed she is. That's another one we hear. This is code language for this bias. So watch out for that. And the biggest thing you can do as an ally and how to challenge people with care in this situation is to coach them through it. So you really, really would rather intervene and say, well, what things has he done like this before? How do you know he's a natural? How do you know he'd be great in that role? I'm not sure. Do you know if she's interested? Have you asked her? It's a big one for that one. We don't usually do. She's never done that before. Well, what has she done similar to that before? I'm not sure she'll fit. Why do you say that? Okay. Those are really good ways just to test people's bias in the moment. Test your own bias in the moment. And I love to flip it to test it for this. A shorthand trick is if you're saying something about somebody that feels a little biased or you catch yourself, ask yourself, would I say the same thing if they were the opposite gender? And this works with people of color. Would I say this if they were white, not black? Whatever it is, you can do the flip it to test it. And often we can uncover our bias pretty quickly in those scenarios. The best way to challenge is with questions. So I mentioned before, the words we don't want to use when we're in coaching mode and when we're challenging others, we want to create a two-way conversation. We don't want to ask questions that are really testing our own assumptions. So this is why close-ended questions are so ineffective. So when you say do, could, should, would, are, anything with a helping verb at the beginning, you're giving somebody a chance just to say a 1 or 2 word answer. They're not going to expand the dialogue much. They're probably going to get defensive, especially the should question often puts somebody on, you're testing your own idea to see if they'll agree with you. And you know you're doing it. I've done it before too. Shouldn't we just do it this way? Have you considered doing it this way? You're like, that's my idea. I just want you to say, yes, I like my idea, right? This is advice giving. This is a problematic. So when we really want to challenge somebody, you want to get them to talk, right? You don't want to berate them or talk at them. These are words you want to use. So again, jot down in your workbook, jot down when you're taking notes. We're going to talk about this in our breakout rooms more, is the what question. And you can expand upon that, right? What do you think? What should we do? What happened? Like very simple questions. What questions do you have? There's a huge difference between asking somebody a what questions do you have versus do you have any questions? I get a totally different response from people. Tell me more. I like say more too. Say more about that. Tell me more about that. Especially when you say it with a gentle tone and kind of uptick at the end that you're signaling it's a question. Please describe the situation, describe what's going on here, describe what you see. How does this affect the team? How did you arrive at this conclusion? And then I told you before, help me understand. That's one of my personal faves. But again, I've been coached through help me understand situations so much it almost comes nature to me. The more we normalize this language, the more you create a culture of inclusion. So inclusive cultures, I will tell you, ones where there are allies, ones where diversity thrives, we ask a lot more than we tell. We challenge people, we challenge their thinking by asking them to share their thinking versus just downplaying their idea, not listening to them, shaming, getting defensive, all these negative behaviors. It's almost impossible to create a lack of safety or create defensiveness when you ask questions that start with these words. So just again, back pocket questions, kind of put them in your back pocket for now. Think about how you could challenge others that you care about with these types of question words, and maybe ones that have worked well for you over time. You probably have some you like that work well, that can kind of flow very easily. Pick ones that work well for you, pick ones that feel good to you. Now, once you ask a question, on the other side is listening. And this is where we tend to really struggle as human beings. Most people overestimate their ability to listen. And you can't challenge somebody's thinking without listening to what they're thinking, right? Because as humans, we're kind of keeping score, right? Like, how much, oh, they did listen to me. I guess I should listen to them, right? So it's a reciprocal relationship. But at the end of the day, people are much more likely to take action on their own ideas than your ideas. So remember what it was like to be a child and your parents tell you to do a chore or tell you what you should do or tell you how to do your science project, whatever it was. Remember how committed you were to it, how bought in, how likely you were to follow their advice. If you were like me, a little bit of a rebel, you probably didn't do it. But if it was your idea, and my mom did this really well. I didn't know what she was doing at the time, but she'd be like, well, what do you think? How do you think you should get there? What's your plan? Gosh darn it. She didn't solve my problem for me. And by not solving her problem for me, I came up with my own idea and I was far more likely to take action on it because she listened. So this ideally, in a hard conversation, when we're challenging people with care, when we want to give them feedback, open the door to something that needs to change, or maybe help them understand what they're doing that's unhelpful, you actually want to listen more than you speak. So I like this kind of analysis. So if you think about your next hard conversation, if you're like me, you can kind of keep score, think about how, not that you're winning, but how much you're listening versus how much you're asking. In a good hard conversation, you'd be listening 60% of the time, be asking 25% of the time, and you'd still be asserting. You still need to let people know what you think, especially at the beginning and especially at the end of the conversation. The bookends are really important. Framing, you can assert, but we often spend like 50% of the time asserting, right? We spend little time asking and very little time listening, and we wonder why nothing changes. And by now you're probably thinking about a difficult person you have to work with. And you're probably thinking, Julie, you've never met so-and-so, right? They are difficult. They don't want to change and they may not want to. But I would say, what was the worst that could happen if you tried listening more to them and asking them open-ended questions? I want to venture to say, in all the years I've been doing this and teaching this, that most of the time people will say, wow, that was a hard conversation, but I learned more about their perspective than I had. And I didn't know this is what they were thinking. I didn't know why they were doing what they were doing. Now I know. So oftentimes it can be a short-term investment of a longer conversation versus the one and done, conversation that feels like you got it done, but since the issue resurfaces later. So it's a short-term investment for a long-term payoff. And as humans, we like instant gratifications. This is why we don't spend as much time listening, because it's longer and it feels painful. Remind yourself, on the other side of a conversation like this, you learn something, you build trust, and you're more likely to get positive outcomes in the conversation than you were if you just kept talking at somebody. So I'm going to give you a minute to think on these questions again in your workbook. If you've been following along on the slides and taking some notes, you saw the microaggressions, so interruptions, biases, taking credit for an idea. What ones resonated with you? I saw in the chat interruption struck a chord with some. So either that you've experienced or you've seen other people experience. And then when you have seen the potential versus performance bias at work. So again, when I said we tend to unfairly assume that men that haven't done something before can do it, that's the potential factor, versus women have to have done it again, oftentimes to believe they will do it again, because we just haven't seen as many women do those things before in the workplace. So when have you seen it? What types of statements, what types of scenarios play out there? And then how can you ask questions and listen to challenge more? So maybe you like some of those question starter words. Maybe you'll eliminate some of those non-open question words I shared with you. And how can you get to that 60% listening? And maybe even just assess yourself, like, where am I now in a hard conversation? Am I listening? Like, am I listening here? How could I listen more? So give me a moment to think on this before Lori sends you to your breakout rooms. See some chats coming in. Leading the witness questions, Carol said. I love that. Tiffany said women are also seen as a bigger risk, quotes, for a bigger job or role. This is often because they are not as well known there than their male colleague. Totally true. Totally true. And we haven't seen a woman do that role before. Tiffany, you know this in your industry and the role you have now. We just haven't seen it before. So it seems risky, even though it's not risky, and that women are very talented as well. Our brain just hasn't seen it. So somehow we think that it can't be done. So just watching your bias. And then some people lower experience really want you to solve their problems. You have to get them to give them where you solve the issue. Yeah, sometimes we do have to direct people up front, but when we're having a hard conversation, challenging and listening is a better bet to get those outcomes. Okay, Lori says the breakout rooms are ready, so we're going to send you back there, and I'll hopefully get a chance to visit with y'all there. All right, I think people are coming back. Small group so far. If anybody, as you're coming back, if you want to share something you learned, something you shared, or something you heard in your group, I'll just share some of the insights I heard as I was going around to several breakout rooms. So if you saw me pop in and out, that was strategic. I wanted to get a chance to hear as many of conversations as I could. But what I heard y'all say is that some of these things I hadn't been looking for before, or I hadn't experienced that potential versus
Other people won't catch analogies.
So now I know to look for it. I did hear quite a few women say the interruptions factor is very real. I heard another group say how important listening was, that listening to understand versus seek, that if anyone remembers 7 Habits, seek to understand versus being understood is a lot of times how we go into conversations, kind of checking ourselves, especially in hard conversations. But I'll open it up. Anyone else want to share what you discussed or ahas you had as you were talking about challenge with care with your teams?
Hey, Julie, this is Susan Vaughn. In our group, I think it was interesting, like talking about the interruptions piece of it, I'm sorry, it was the interview when you would interview for a job or apply for a job. And, it's surprising for some people in our group that would happen. But we talked about it. I said, I think it's maybe rolling off generational, because I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old. My 20-year-old will apply for anything. She just said the day, it's like, I didn't even fully qualify, and I did it and I got it. I'm like, gosh. So, I think even as sad as it is, the more we educate and we teach the next generation, we can make some of these things go away. Same with so many other problems in the world right now.
Right. Yeah. 2 things, Susan. I love that. So yes, the younger generation is much more aware of bias. I didn't even know what gender bias was, and I was a women's studies major in college. So we've definitely increased awareness on this over the years. The other side to this, though, is we really do need to address the root cause of these problems, because otherwise we're just going to keep kicking the can to the next generation to solve the problems that have been around. They're not going to miraculously go away, But I do agree with you. Women in particular know, well, you don't have to meet all the criteria anymore, which was a secret for my generation. We thought you had to meet all the criteria. It brings me to another point shared in the breakout room. Someone shared, well, we really need to look at why people might not even be applying. This is a big aha right now for people wanting to increase diversity. They're not getting people of color. They're not getting LGBTQ plus, whatever dimensions that you want to fold into your diversity experience. You're not getting as many women, whatever it is. Look at the criteria on your job descriptions and really take a thorough comb on what is actually required and make sure all of those qualifications are absolutely necessary to do the job. You will, and this doesn't mean reduce the criteria necessarily, but you will get a broader pool of talent if you look at just the legitimate criteria. We tend to put things in there that are wish list things, and then you don't get the diverse talent even applying for those jobs. So just think about it that way. The other things with job descriptions, they tend to have a lot of male language. I had a client, I mean, this was this year, she said, we had quarterback of the IT team was the job in the job description. You know, what woman is going to apply for that role? She's not going to see herself as the quarterback, right? So it's everywhere. Knock it out of the park. You know, this language, the sports analogies, because job descriptions have been written largely for men, especially in the tech industry. Just being careful to look at that language and make sure it's as inclusive as it could be.
Julie, there was a comment brought up real quick in our group by Dan. He made a really good point. He said, you know, somebody told me, a woman once during meetings, that she felt interrupted more often than the men. And he's like, I didn't even realize it. And that really like kind of brings a good point to my mind, is that as women, we have to be advocates for ourselves to feel like we can share that with our male allies, because it's not always that people don't care, it's that they don't know.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Darcy. Yeah, well said. Yeah, and sometimes giving somebody a chance to be an ally for you, right? So people don't know what they haven't experienced. And a lot of times with the gender in the workplace, we can't expect men to know what it's like to be walking around as a woman in the workplace. That is just not fair, right? And so giving people a window into your world to say, yeah, these microaggressions, I do experience them. Here's what a day in my life looks like. I read a book over the summer, I'm Still Here by Austin Channing Brown, and it was about a Black woman's experience in corporate America. And I could not believe the microaggressions that she experienced. And it was very real. But I didn't know what I didn't know because I've walked around as a white woman in corporate America for a very long time. So just thinking about how can you give somebody a window into your world, and as an ally, how can we be willing to listen to that story, even when it's sometimes hard to hear? But these things are really real, and they do hold back women in diversity inside organizations. So last tool to try on, and I love everybody as I'm going through this, those of you who work, I know we've got some Roches and Lilies here in the group. You've probably heard about coaching tools. You've probably been given coaching tools for organizations that may not have, you know, all this online learning or all these tools. It's probably new for you. But I just want to kind of frame it as coaching is really, really helpful, especially when you're wanting to create an inclusive team. Now, there's lots of misunderstandings about coaching. What I'm not going to teach you is how to give somebody advice. I'm not going to teach you what to say to manipulate somebody to get them to like your idea or to change their behavior. This is much more about an influential technique, about asking questions, listening, and creating space for self-discovery. So if you've ever heard the word facilitate, that's intentional on this slide, that literally means to make easy for somebody. So when you're coaching somebody, you're trying to make it easy for them to come up with ideas, easy for them to solve problems, right? For themselves. It's less about putting the rescue cape on and saving the day for them. So the model that I use for this, similar to the SBI model for feedback, I like models and acronyms because I can remember them in the heat of the moment when things are hard. And there's tons of models for coaching, but the one that I find the easiest, that you don't have to get a coaching certification for to use, is easy, and it is easy to prepare, it's easy to use, it's easy to remember. This is how you pair together kind of those listening and questioning strategies. So ideally in this acronym, GROW is what it stands for. So GROW, as you see listed here, you want to extend the purpose of the conversation. So this is where hard conversations go off the rails early, as if we don't say up front what the conversation is about and then it veers another direction. shame on you for not telling the person what we were here to talk about and holding them to that goal. So what we want to do in a conversation is say, hey, I want to talk to you about X, right? Is that okay with you? Do you have 20 minutes to talk about X? Whatever it is, again, that framing up front. Again, think about those conversation starters we shared when we were talking about feedback. Same goes here. You can have kind of an entry to the conversation. Oftentimes the beginning is the hardest when we're trying to talk to somebody about something difficult. So we just want to get on the same page with the goal. I call this like boundaries. If you think about guardrails when you're driving down a road, for those of you who still drive around nowadays, I have not filled up my gas tank in a very long time personally. But if you think about guardrails to a conversation, using that as an analogy, you want people to agree to the same goal up front. You want them to steer in this lane. So when somebody, and you know, difficult people or difficult conversations you might have where it like goes this way and you're like, how did we start talking about this? Oh my gosh, this has been a 2-hour conversation. The reason that happens is because we didn't agree to the purpose of the conversation up front. And if somebody veers off track, you need to hold them accountable to, we agreed to talk about this. Is it okay if we go back to talking about this? Okay, so this is keeping people on track in the conversation, because when I coach leaders, I'm being inclusive and they say, I don't have time for conversations like this. That's why you don't have time, because you haven't managed them well in the past. Ideally, this type of conversation should only take about 20 minutes. If it's a very intense problem, it might take several 20-minute conversations to unpack, but you know, problems that have been created for years aren't going to be solved in 20 minutes. So you think about how big the problem is and how much time it might take to dedicate. But ideally, kind of a 20-minute conversation. Here's what we're going to talk about. Do you agree? Is that okay with you? What do you think? Okay, so that's the goal. Then we want to get into the reality. So when we're talking about somebody that's hard, maybe you're thinking about somebody on your team that might be doing something that's just not the best, right? You wish there was like this little thing you wish you could tweak about them, and they would be a better performer. You need to paint the reality. So these are the pain points. So people don't change without pain. So you got to reveal the pain points of the goal not being met. So I want to talk to you about interruptions in our team meeting. Let's just go for one of the big microaggressions. Is that okay with you? Okay, so that might be how you frame it. The reality is that the perception is in meetings, you interrupt people at a higher frequency. Okay. The reason that's important is because people don't feel as heard in team meetings, right? That might be a way to frame it. The options, right? So then once you've kind of revealed a pain point, and again, gone to like a behavior, not something personal about somebody, you want to brainstorm options together. These are the ideas that resolve the challenges of the current reality. So now let's brainstorm. So goal, what do you think? Is that okay? Reality, painting picture of what is not happening, relate to that goal. Options are, what ideas do we have? Let's brainstorm. Then the will part, and this is the part that we often forget when we're having a hard conversation, is we forget how to end the conversation, and then it bubbles up again because we didn't close it out the first time. So at the end of a hard conversation, we always want to say, what have we committed to doing today? Right? What have we agreed? What are next steps? When will we follow up? Because there's never going to be a behavior change that happens in a 20-minute meeting vacuum, right? Especially if it's been going on for a long time. So this is the commitment to action to achieve the goal. Now, some sample questions you might consider. So thinking about a coaching conversation, I want you to think about some scenarios. Maybe there's some of those microaggressions we talked about earlier. Maybe it's a feedback conversation you need to have with somebody. Maybe it's just recognizing that you want to be a better ally to somebody and have a conversation with somebody different than you. Whatever it is, choose your own adventure, choose your own scenario that applies to you. You kind of want to do a little bit of a prep work. So again, 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes to kind of think through these questions, or think about the questions you want to have again in your back pocket that you can ask in that conversation. So preparation totally pays off. The more prepared I am for a meeting, the better it's going to go. I know that. So spending the 5 minutes is a worthy investment. Up front, we want to think about, what does success look like? What do you want? What goals are you working on? So these are really good open-ended questions. What do you think? These types of questions. So again, frame the conversation. We're here to talk about this, or is it okay if we talk about this? Then once you've teed up the subject, asking some open-ended questions to get their perspective and get their buy-in and commitment up front to resolving the issue. So that's the beginning. And once we've established a goal that we're going to talk about this, good looks like this, success looks like this, whatever it is, then we want to kind of deal with the reality. So what's preventing you from achieving that goal? What's missing in our current reality? What are the obstacles? What are the barriers? Why is this not happening? So again, pain. So reality is the disconnect of where we want a goal, right? Maybe you want a goal to be more diverse and inclusive, whatever that looks like at your organization. The reality is we're not there yet, right? We don't have as many people of color. We don't have as many women, whatever it is. Okay, what are the obstacles? What are the barriers? So in that conversation, we want to just tee out, kind of pull those out so we understand goal is here, but a reality, we're not hitting that goal today. Then we can brainstorm options. And then you want to get to root causes. What ideas do you have? I always have clients that share with me, well, what if someone says they don't know? And Tiffany shared this in the chat. What if somebody really doesn't know the solution to their problem? Yeah, they might believe that. I like to ask if anyone that appreciates Star Wars will appreciate this reference, the Jedi mind trick question. Anyone that appreciates Star Wars, I love me some Yoda. I actually have the little baby Yoda right here is my inspiration on my desk. And hard days, like today's kind of been a hard day. I look at him like, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. But options, one thing you can say that's kind of a Jedi mind trick is, what if you did know? I had my coaching certification. They asked me this question a lot. I was like, I don't know. But often if you push somebody that you're not going to give them the answer, you're not going to tell them what they need to do because they're not going to take action on it anyway. I'll say too, what if someone else was here? You know, what would they say? And it's so funny how people can come up with ideas when they think it's someone else's, but it's really their idea. They just know that if Sam was here, Sam would say this. Well, why can't you say that, right? So how can you kind of frame that as a subtle way to pull out somebody's ideas, especially if they're oftentimes just lacking confidence. That's why they think they don't have good ideas. Especially people that are underrepresented, women, people of color tend to have this problem more because they're not used to being heard as much. And then will. So what will we be committing to doing? What's the next step? When do you want me to follow up with you? Those are some good questions. Save the last 5 minutes of a conversation for the will questions. We often don't give enough time to setting true commitments, and the conversation ends, we run off to something else, and 2 weeks later, we're having the same problem again. We're like, well, we talked about that. See, that didn't work. That person's difficult. And that just reinforces the self-fulfilling prophecy. So spend time on the commitment piece. I see some questions coming through in the chat. I think that now interruptions can be even more common because we're on Skype, Teams, and Zoom. I've been trying to say hand raising option. It's so true. The people that were air hogs before are even worse now, the data shows. So women are reporting that they're less likely to be heard in Zoom meetings now than even before. We've taken some steps forward, but a lot of steps back, it seems like, with these things. So agree, other people are saying that. Emojis, hand raising. I often set a ground rule that everyone will be heard before, is in smaller groups, this makes sense. Everyone needs to be heard before someone else shares again, or that I want to hear from everyone in this team meeting and set the expectation up front that you will participate and call on people if they're being quiet. Oftentimes sharing the agenda, sharing the discussion points, sharing the questions in advance, especially for introverted people, be really careful about that because they need time to process things. So not everyone likes to be called out on the spot. And then Tiffany's saying, you want a copy of the presentation? Absolutely, I can get you a PDF copy that you can see. It's a big presentation file, so we can definitely share that on the other side of this. A couple more things, and then we'll do another breakout room exercise. So be prepared. Think about this GROW model. Think about the questions you like that I just went through. Think about questions you'd add to your ally toolkit, because self-discovery is a powerful tool. So when you think about an ally, somebody that I often say is there for somebody different than them, if you can hold space, when I say hold space, it's like creating space so that people can say things that are difficult. And you know, the people that you trust at work, you can tell them about really tough stuff. You can tell them about things that didn't go well. You can be vulnerable. You can be real with them. That is valuable. That seems like fluffy, nice to have stuff at work, but I'm telling you now more than ever, that is non-negotiable for people to feel psychological safety. So how do you do that as an ally? You create and hold space for people to own their ideas, to solve their own problems versus offering ideas and solving their problems for them. So that means pausing, asking questions, listening, zipping it when you want to be like, I did that 5 years ago and here's what you should do. Just be quiet. I clench my back molars sometimes, like don't talk. Resist the temptation because it can be hard. But space for others, I mentioned before, facilitate is literally to make easy for somebody else. It's a French word for facile, easy. Make it easier for people to think on their own. Let them make mistakes, process their thoughts. We know that people have to fail. They have to make mistakes as long as it's not, life-threatening, hopefully, or not damaging to the whole business. But let them have some small mistakes along the way. So we learn more from mistakes because our brains remember them, right? Our brains remember the negative experiences way more than the 10 positive experiences. We need a lot more positive reinforcement for that exact reason. And then free the situation from judgment. Take judgment out of this. Take the emotion out of it. Offer perspective taking. If I were the other person, how would I feel? Right? That empathy. How can you put yourself in their perspective? And one last piece that's really important for coaching is assume the other person you're talking to is a good human. And this might sound totally normal to think that, but a lot of times when I'm talking about a client, like this person is, if you go into the conversation thinking it's not going to work, you'll be right. It won't work. Okay. So if you go into a conversation like this, that needs to be candid, that needs to be vulnerable, that needs to have that space for bravery and courage, you got to think, assuming this person's a good human and they want good things just like I do, what might that be? Last thing here is that coaches focus forward. So I'll never forget being taught this about the difference between coaching and therapy. You might be thinking, this sounds like work therapy. It's a little bit. Therapy focused backwards though. Okay, so therapy is a lot more focused on what's happened in the past and how to avoid that in the future. Coaching is much more about forward because we know that the past can't be changed. Okay, so we can acknowledge past behavior, we can take ownership of past behavior, but what we really want to influence is the future. So we can only influence and change future actions and behaviors. So that's why the GROW model is really helpful. Well, back to the goal. Yes, I understand that happened 2 weeks ago. Back to the goal. Let's talk about that and how we can make that better. It's all about the coachee. It is not about you. And for those of us with egos and those of us who are extroverted like me, being quiet, reminding myself this is much more about their experience. If I jump in and share my idea or share my perspective or what I think, I've just made this conversation all about me, and they're less likely to be vulnerable and share things about them. So the last piece that we're going to practice for a breakout now, questions for you, is what the GROW model questions you like. So again, goal, reality, options, will. That's what the framework stands for. So goal, reality, options, will. What questions do you like when teeing up a goal? What questions do you like when teeing up the reality, those pain points? What questions would work to brainstorm options? Remember, we talked about barriers and obstacles. And then will, commitments. We want someone to commit going forward. What coaching principles resonated with you? So if you think about focusing forward, self-discovery, listening, asking questions, all the things we've been talking about for candid conversations and stretching talent, creating space, holding space. And then how could you use something like the GROW model? So what I'd love for everybody to do, again, pick one of these questions, if questions you like, coaching principles that resonated with you. For those of you who have used tools like this in the past, feel free to share your own personal experiences. But if you've got a scenario, I think this could be a really fun part of our breakout, to share a scenario, share something that you want to work on or get feedback on in a safe, brave place that we have today. I love the chat. So while I'm teeing that up, I'll just make sure that we kind of gather our chats. Sometimes the blanking behavior is much worse than interrupting. Someone must chair the meeting to make the meeting flow. Yes, I have been on meetings where it's like, well, what do we want to talk about today? And I'm like, there's no goal. There's no agenda. Yes, that is important, Nikki. Here, we have a no politicking role. You can make your point once, but then you have made it others speak. You change your mind based on the feedback. I love that. Once you share it once, because the repeat record approach is not helpful for a coaching conversation. And then great point. Okay, good. All right, breakout rooms are ready. Let's center it away. We'll be back in 10 minutes. So as you're coming back, oh, wow, those were such great discussions. I think I got to all the breakout rooms that time because we had a little bit more time. So Wow, that was awesome. I heard so many different things. I'm still unpacking all of it myself. So as we come back, if anyone wants to share live, either feel free to jump on the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and share an aha moment you had with the group or something that you've learned. Anyone want to share? Or who would like to share? Any ahas or things you discussed?
Julie,
Yeah, go for it.
this is Dan. I was just going to say this last time we had more time in the breakout room, and we had really excellent discussions. And I feel like got to know the people for more than 30 seconds. And so I was just going to comment that I appreciated the extra time that time.
Good, good. That was our design, and I almost forgot as I was checking the time. Like, oh, 15 minutes, and 15 minutes makes a big difference. Thanks for that feedback, Dan. Who else wants to share?
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We got an echo. You have two audio devices on at the same time. You can turn one off. Okay, who was that? Did anyone see who that was? I didn't see. Okay, well, if that was you, we could hear you, but there was an echo. So if you can get one of your devices turned off, I'm sure it'll be better. Anyone else want to share?
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
It's Joy Neely. I would just say the last group I was in, I just want to applaud the group for just what I would say is courageous authenticity, just being very vulnerable and open about what's working and what's also being challenged, because it really allowed the group to almost like problem solve, share ideas, give suggestions. So I think the extra time was very helpful. And, you know, a lot of the tools from the coaching dialogue, I feel like are going to be pulled forward with the groups as well. So
Good, thanks. Thanks, Joy. I had a lot of people share kind of candid scenarios that they're dealing with not connecting with somebody or not being able to communicate with their team members the way they'd like. And of course, this year has been a wild ride. I heard some conversations just about regular check-ins with our team members. Something that often happens that, again, isn't unintentional or isn't intentionally bad, but we tend to check in with people like us, right, on our team, right? Whether it's I'm a woman, so I check in with women or whatever it is, just knowing we're also likely to place assumptions on other people that I heard in another group that because I made this mistake, I'm assuming other people are going to make this mistake. So I want to jump in and solve their problem for them or help them before it happens. So we have a tendency to think, you know, kind of gravitate towards people like us. And again, the things we talked about today, have hard conversations with people like us because we feel safer. But we also tend to assume that everyone thinks like us and behaves like us is going to go through the same path as us. So just being careful with some of those assumptions and biases that we just all carry around. Good, good. Who else wants to share? I'm going to wrap up with commitments in a minute, but anyone else want to share what you discussed?
Hey, Julie, one that I guess we talked about in our group, and I struggle with it, and I see it a lot, and some others did, but we didn't really have some good ideas how to resolve it. And that is when you get to the options discussion, a lot of times people will tend to look at things will be better and will be different if others can change versus somebody internalizing what are the things that they can change.
I love
right?
that.
So
Yeah.
I can get A done and B done and C done if Jim, John, and George would give me the documents at the right time, or they were better documents, or they didn't have errors in them. And so it's always, you know, I always struggle with how do I get someone to look at, those are all great things, except what are the things you have the ability to change versus everybody else out there that's causing you the inability to perform. And I don't know what the right way is to get somebody to look in the mirror and be reflective about, oh, there's 7 billion people on this planet. I only have control of one. So what are the things I can do?
Right, Michael. Oh, that's so good. I heard that in a breakout discussion. It's like, what am I doing to contribute to this situation? It's a really helpful tool for yourself and your own self-awareness of what am I bringing to this conversation? How could I be contributing to this problem versus blaming others or willing everyone else to change but myself? But it also is a really powerful coaching question. When I have coaching clients that deflect and it's everyone else is the problem and not me, I ask that question. I say, well, what are you contributing to the problem? How could you be helpful in solving this problem? Again, back to the goal in the grow conversation, back to the goal. What is it that's missing coming from you? People don't like that question, but if you ask an open question, right, they have to answer it. So it's not like, do you think you're contributing to the problem? They can just say no. Say, what are you doing to contribute to the problem? They have to say something. And this is where with coaching too, holding that space and just being quiet and sitting back and listening. I often will like grab my glass of water, like, and just letting them process that, because it's not being mean to somebody. It's just, of course, they're contributing to the situation. Like you said, Michael, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Of course, we're all doing something that's not perfect. Chances of perfection are highly unlikely, and we all have some of our own mistakes to own up. And that's part of the vulnerability of being an ally too, is you're going to make mistakes along the way. You're going to say and do incorrect things, and being open to that feedback and correction yourself. So last piece for today, we're going to wrap up here at 4:30. Before we do that, and I pass the baton back to Rebecca to lead us in closing us out, I did want to set some intentional commitments. So this has been 2.5 hours or so of your life. I want to make sure that it has a positive impact, that you walk away with something tangible you can do. Again, we'll provide these slides to you. You have the workbook that you can follow along and kind of put pen to paper and think about how you can use some of these tools. But set intention. These are some great books as just kind of ideas to tee up on your journey to being an ally or engaging others as allies. Radical Candor, that's where I got the challenge with care framework. So I borrowed that from Kim Scott. She's got a podcast, a TED Talk. She's got great tools. Her book is fantastic. Highly recommend that. Fierce Conversations. There's all sorts of conversations. Some of you mentioned you have conversation frameworks at your business. Candid Conversations, Crucial Conversations. There's so many different ones, whatever you like. I like the Fierce Conversations book. They're all great, honestly. They all teach very similar things, many of the things we talked about today, as well as Crucial Conversations. So take a pick and keep on the journey. You probably knew a lot of these things that I shared with you, so I probably didn't give you like anything magic bullet solution you hadn't heard before, but it's putting it together. This is where the magic happens with inclusive leadership, when you can have an environment where we give you and take feedback very regularly, and it's a positive thing, and it's embedded in our culture. We have hard conversations. We don't kick the can. We don't wait to have them until it's too late. And we really manage microaggressions and the interruptions and all this stuff up front so they don't become really big problems later. Then you're really humming as an inclusive leader, and everyone is participating in that culture all together. So it's usually pockets of this we do well, and there's usually areas where we could do better and areas that are opportunities. So if you think about how we can balance candid feedback more as a leader, maybe how you'll challenge with care more or coach more. Just those were the key components we talked about today with stretching talent equally. I'd love to wrap up on a positive note with one thing, one thing you're taking away from this conversation, one thing you can do on any of those topic areas. So feel free to put something in the chat. Oh, and Nick is going to close us out today. Oh, Nick Taylor wants to share something. Nick, did you want to share?
Actually, it was to Michael's point, and there's a definite point where, as I used to coach my dog, there definitely was a point where I had to stop coaching him and get the rolled out newspaper up, because he was bigger and more stupid than me, and we couldn't have that when we were driving down the road at 70 miles an hour. So you have to. There's a point where that's all done. Now you're going to do this. It has to happen.
That's awesome. Yeah. So in a longer, if we had more time, I would go into a whole breakdown of this, Nick. And I know you know coaching skills well. People have to have the skill and the will to be coached, right? So they have to want to be coached, and they have to have some of the skills to actually know how to solve their own problems. So sometimes when we just coach somebody when they haven't put on their training wheels yet, it's not going to work out, right? To your point about your dog, sometimes people just don't get it yet, right? I have a 6-year-old. I kind of meet her where she's at. Sometimes she needs directed. Sometimes I can coach her, but if she doesn't know what I'm talking about, coaching is not going to work. It's a really good point. And people have to be willing to change. You know, at the end of the day, if you've got somebody on your team that's not willing to change, your chances of success with coaching is very low. They have to have some will. They have to have some motivation to recognize their own challenges and be willing to be vulnerable and accept them and change some of their behavior. All right, who else wants to share? So wrap up with commitments, 1 or 2 things you're taking away from today's conversation. So feel free to share those in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and share, wrap us up on a positive note.
Julie, this is Ben Phillips. I'll just go quickly. I think one thing I'm going to take away is really putting the coachy first. And to me, it's trying to bring more to the table than what my HR department has given me. And Mary Beth brought a book that she had read, and some extra effort she's putting forth as she's coaching someone, right? Because it's a journey of how what type of tools you can bring to that table. And obviously, you shared a few books that you love that help support, or kind of in my mind can be tools towards that. So I guess maybe just being more aware that there's more out there than what's in my current professional development platform at my company. And just like anything else, you got to put time into it, and you got to show that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Ben. I love that. It's a journey, right? And sometimes if we go into a book, sometimes I'm like, I already know this. Well, yeah, I might have heard some of this, but being open to learning more about it, right? Maybe there's a new angle that I can take. I had focusing forward, so some listening, people are sharing in the chat here. I love this, holding space, not trying to share my story with someone sharing their story. Yes, using the GROW model and sharing it with others. Awesome. We have time for maybe one more share. Does someone else want to share live? Thoughts?
Yeah, Julie, the one thing on coaching is I tended to think of coaching and mentoring as the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then so at work we have, people will get together to have mentoring sessions, and they're scheduled. But in reality, coaching is a lot more broader than mentoring. It doesn't have to be the same person all the time, and it's taking those opportunities when they present themselves to be a coach versus saying, oh, do you want to be a mentor and I'll mentor you, right?
Yeah, totally different, Michael. Yeah, so mentoring is like a future version of yourself, right? Somebody that gives advice, tells you, oh, here's what's going to happen, and I've been there, done that. Here's what you can do. It's a lot more telling. Coaching is a lot more asking. Totally different. Right? A coach probably hasn't been you before, doesn't know what it's like to be you, isn't going to give you advice, and isn't biased. Right. And so kind of just filters your own thoughts. Kind of, I mentioned like work therapist before. It's not a therapist at work, but it is somebody that kind of operates that way, hasn't lived your experiences. So they're really going to facilitate your own thinking instead. Awesome. Dave's going to work on the GROW model. Awesome. Well, I know we're at the top of our time together. Tiffany, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Julie. Really appreciate all the great insights that you've had. Yes, we can all do our silent clap. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone who attended today. This event hopefully has provided you with a lot of great information and will help you be an ally for gender equality. Thank you, Julie. Thank you to the OperationALL committee, Lori and Carol in the background, making sure that we were seamlessly moving all these moving parts. Thank you so much. Before I close, I want to invite you to 2 more Women in High Tech events later this year. The first one is our 2020 virtual holiday networking party. We're going to have a members only event from 6 to 8 Eastern Standard Time on December 2nd. We're going to have some fun, play a little game, enjoy our time together, network, and celebrate our accomplishments and what we're going to do in 2021. If you're not a member, you can join now. If you're with a sponsor organization, your membership can be worked through your sponsorship. We are going to uphold our tradition at these events. We usually bring toys to give to the Dayspring Center. This year, we're asking that when you make your registration, that you give a donation. There's a few amounts that you can choose from when you register for the event. I do hope you come. The Dayspring Center provides emergency shelter, clothing, and nourishing meals for families experiencing homelessness and children in central Indiana. So hopefully you'll be able to come to that event and then and be able to give a nice donation there. And then our second virtual book club meeting will be held on December 10th from 6 to 7. We are reading and discussing Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. You can go to womeninhightech.org/events to find out those and register for them. And I want you to keep an eye out for more details about our next Executive Women's Forum, which will be held in February of 2021, which is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, team. I hope you feel like you've got a lot of things that you can go back to your organization and work on. And I've really had a lot of fun for this last 2.5 hours. So thank you all. We'll close it there.